The draw for the late debate has taken place. Tonight it has been submitted by the MLA for Hants West, and it be resolved that this House applaud the tremendous volunteer efforts of parents involved in the Windsor West Hants Minor hockey system and recognize their exceptional commitment to bettering the lives of hundreds of children. We will commence with the daily routine, presenting and reading of petitions. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to present a petition entitled "To Stop Implementing Local Improvement Charges on O'Connell Drive," and it's signed by 66 people on the street, and actually it's every household on the street has signed this, and it's signed by myself as well.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I may do an introduction, I believe they're here. So, just in the East Gallery, staff and Board of Directors of the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation, Dr. I'll ask them to rise and receive a warm welcome to the House. Dr. Laurie Francis, Deborah Langell, who's the Director of Performance and Accountability, Catherine Connors, Manager, Health Research and Matching Grants Program, and Jeremy Godfrey, Communications Assistant. And I just want to thank them for the work that they do on behalf of Nova Scotians and the health research. And I beg leave to introduce And I'm just introducing the annual report for 2006-07 for building capacity, the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation.
The report is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table the 2006-2007 annual report of the Law Foundation of Nova Scotia.
The report is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to do an introduction before tabling this, although the two are not related.
Please do.
Mr. Speaker, I draw the attention of the members of the House to the East Gallery, where we're joined today by Graham Conrad, who is the Executive Director of the Retail Gasoline Dealers Association of Nova Scotia, and his wife, Donna. And we welcome Graham and Donna to the balcony, and I'd ask all members to give them a warm welcome to Graham. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table present the report of the Registrar General containing the vital statistics of the province for the year ending December 31st, 2006.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on this, the anniversary of this government's response to the Nunn Commission, it is with pleasure that I rise to speak to the House of Assembly today about one of this government's newest initiatives, which will ensure the children and youth of this province have the best opportunities to reach their full potential. And while I am proud to say staff of my department have worked tirelessly in the development of our strategy for children and youth, I'm equally proud to say that staff from the Departments of Health, Health Promotion and Protection, Justice and Education have had equally significant and influential roles in its development. Mr. Speaker, by working together as a team in a collective, coordinated effort, we are making a real difference in the lives of young Nova Scotians and their families with our new child and youth strategy entitled, "Our Kids Are Worth It." And Mr. Speaker, we received positive endorsement and encouragement from our many stakeholders Monday on the direction and content of the child and youth strategy. We are pleased to have these key partners join with us in delivering these joint programs and services on behalf of all Nova Scotia families. Now, this is a comprehensive strategy which focuses on a range of services from prevention to intensive intervention. We are introducing new services while expanding existing ones, all to better meet the needs of those who need us most, our children. This strategy is a valuable piece of the fabric of our social prosperity framework, based on the principles of collaboration, coordination, and shared responsibility. Because we all share responsibility for making sure our kids live healthy, productive lives. This strategy was a commitment made by this government after the release of the Nunn Commission report. And Mr. Speaker, our commitment does not end there. Over the coming months, we will be implementing the pilot programs and evaluating their success as we support our province's children, youth, and families. These are pilots at the local, regional, and provincial levels. They include initiatives such as family help expansion.
Order, please. The chatter is getting a little high. The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wraparound services, Schools Plus, a parenting journey program, a place to belong, youth navigators, child welfare mental health services, a social policy research group, a provincial youth advisory network, and cooperation and coordination with the Kids Help Phone. We have a mix of both immediate and long-term priorities. We want to build a strong foundation for our youth through initiatives like our Early Learning and Child Care Plan, which will see recruitment and retention of staff and more affordable spaces. We also want to identify problems and help early, providing programs and initiatives for parents and teachers. Coordinating programs and services is essential. Our Executive Director of Youth Strategy and Services, Robert Wright, is leading the charge. We need to make sure the appropriate programs and services are delivered to our youth when and where they need it. We intend to improve access and close gaps. We want a shorter wait for mental health services, and we want to engage youth and promote shared accountability. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are very excited with the range of possibilities this strategy provides government and our partners, but more importantly, the possibilities it provides, Mr. Speaker, for Nova Scotia's families. No longer will any of us talk in isolation within the confines of our programs or departments. We will come together, not for cases, but for children. Our vision is to make sure our children and youth are healthy, safe, nurtured, and responsible, and given the right opportunities to be the best they can be. Our new strategy can and will make that happen. Mr. Speaker, our kids are worth it.
The Honourable, the Member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister's statement on the government's strategy for children and youth. And through you, I would thank her staff and staff from the Departments of Health, Health Promotion, Justice, and Education for their collaboration and attempt to coordinate policy in this area. Although this strategy has been billed as a government strategy for children and youth, it really is a strategy for dealing with youth crime and crime prevention. It does not acknowledge the vast majority of youth and children who are doing wonderful things in the community, and it says little about what it will do to support and to encourage them and to secure their well-being. That being said, it is a youth crime and crime prevention strategy, and it responds to the Nunn inquiry. It responds to Teresa McAvoy's death and the tragic circumstances of her death 3 years ago. So this policy really has been 3 years in the making, and we welcome the government's entry into this debate 3 years later. As you know, Justice Nunn made 34 recommendations, and these can be broken down into two sections. The first part dealt with changes that were needed to the Youth Criminal Justice Act. We know from statements made over the last few days by the Halifax Police, by Deputy Chief McNeil in particular, that there really hasn't been much done. In fact, the policy has been designed to do nothing. Now, I understand that the minister has no control over that, but certainly I would encourage the minister to put some pressure on her federal counterparts to look at the Youth Criminal Justice Act and make some meaningful changes there. But many of Mr. Justice Nunn's recommendations address the lack of coordination between departments. And certainly I would commend the minister for devoting her attention and her department's attention to these initiatives. I've said earlier that most of these initiatives are repackaging of existing programs, and that's not meant as all criticism. Justice Nunn did say that many services existed, that just as much of the problem lay in the fact that departments did not speak to each other and policies were not coordinated. So there is a real lack of coordinating and repackaging services so that they are more accessible to children at risk and their families. A great deal of the money that's been announced in this program has already been spent, and it's already been used to build the institutions of coordination. And that's not necessarily criticism. We do need champions in the bureaucracy who will coordinate strategy and who will push initiatives forward. There's very little invested here in frontline support, and I'd like to speak to that a little further down the road. Most of the investments here are in pilot projects and research. We had hoped that 3 years later that we would be further ahead, that we would have more concrete policies with more beef. And I'd like to suggest some of them that have been brought forward to me by my constituents. In justice, for example, we would like to see more mental health courts. We would like to see a secure treatment facility for young people. We would like to see the Justice Department look at restorative justice initiatives with family group conferencing. And I should say, Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, that I will commend the Minister of Justice for the great work that he has done on the Democracy 250 Committee and the tremendous encouragement he's given to the committee on pursuing youth initiatives. On health, I would like to say something about mental health assessments. That there are too many delays. Justice Nunn complained about the lack of follow-through in the assessments of youth who come into conflict with the law. For example, the two young women who were accused of beating the senior in the Commons with a table leg are still waiting for assessments. And the IWK has complained that they just don't have the resources. And justice delayed there, Mr. Speaker, is justice denied. It prevents rehabilitation and restoration of these young people into the community. On education, again, I commend the Minister of Education for doing a great job with the Quinpool Education Centre and dealing with kids at school who are falling between the cracks there. But what we really need to do is look at the issue of school closures. We close our elementary schools. We're denying the community access to much-needed programs. We're denying kids access to programs that attach them to the community and families. This is the glue that builds the communities, Mr. Speaker. We'd like to see more support for kids with ADHD, for example. Early assessment of these children and prevention programs. And I'd like to speak a bit to the Minister of Community Services herself. We're doing very little for kids in care. Most of our troubled youth come from that area. And I'd like to speak something about poverty. Giving some of these families $4 a month in additional support really does not address the problem of poverty and homelessness. And Mr. Speaker, if we punish the parents, then we're punishing the kids. So I'd like to just, in general, say that I support the minister in her efforts to coordinate. I agree very much with the idea of coordination and doing more with less, but we also need to invest more in frontline services. And I'd like to say something about the reach of this strategy. We expect more, Mr. Speaker, that we need that they're taking small steps, and we need more steps. We need a little bit more imagination. We need a little bit more activity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank the Minister for the advance notice, plenty of advance notice for her remarks today, and I apologize for not being in the House. I was otherwise detained. I want to begin by acknowledging Justice Nunn and the work that Justice Nunn has done on behalf of all of Nova Scotia in his thoughtful deliberations around the terrible tragedy around Teresa McAvoy. And in conjunction with the work that he has done, the McAvoy family has opened themselves up to Nova Scotia to be really this case to be on display for Nova Scotia so that we could get a true sense of where things went wrong and what it is that has failed. Not only that family, but failed all of us as Nova Scotians. So I want to begin by thanking them for their hard work that Justice Nunn has done on behalf of all Nova Scotians. I also want to acknowledge the Minister and in particular the member in your staff, Robert Wright, for the work that he has done on behalf of Nova Scotia. And particularly when I look at the announcement that you made yesterday, while I do have some concerns, it is a good first step in dealing with some of those issues. I was thrilled to hear the talk of breaking down the silos that operate within inside of government. If you remember, when I introduced my poverty reduction strategy, one of the key components to that was breaking down the silos and the fact that we all have a responsibility to those children living in poverty. It's not strictly a responsibility of community services. It goes across governmental departments, and that's the same issue we face with children who are at risk of falling into trouble in the province of Nova Scotia. And I was thrilled to see that they were going to be broken down. One of the issues that I do have concerns, and I looked at the issue of the Youth Navigator, which I think was a wonderful program. I would have encouraged the Minister and I would have encouraged the Department to begin to look at that on a more regional basis, providing one perhaps with every school district or within every health district in the province of Nova Scotia to make sure that service is available. One of the frightening things for Nova Scotian families who have trouble accessing the system, and particularly when you have a child who's difficulty, trying to find and reach out for those supports that you can have for your family to be able to deal with that child. This Youth Navigator for me will become, it should become, and I hope it becomes, a source of entry point for those families, then to be able to send them in the right direction to find the services that each and every child deserves to have when they reach that critical point. The places to belong. I would say that I believe fundamentally that program should roll out within inside of the education system. It was wonderful to hear the ideas of drama and arts being brought back in. Remember, that was part of all of our educational experience. It gave each of us an opportunity to find something that was uniquely ours when we were inside of the education department. It gave us a reason, quite frankly, to get up and go to school the next day. I always used to say the basketball court was what brought me back to school every day, and by accident I got an education while I was there. But the arts, the drama programs, which are happening not all across Nova Scotia, there are some wonderful drama programs, there's some music programs, but they're hit and miss depending on which school you're in. And what really matters is that the educational instructor has taken a keen interest in those individual programs and has then brought in that student body around them to create an environment for that child who is artistic, that child who might lean towards the music program to have an opportunity to excel and feel comfortable inside of the public education system, and really to be part of that community and find their niche and grow as an individual and become a healthy adult. I noticed as we were laying out and looking at each individual program that you were talking about, there's a bit of overlap. And my concern is that we don't chew up resources in overlapping these programs. And I would encourage the minister, over the next number of years, as the information becomes available, that we review this process. Career Seeks is one that I know you just recently reviewed, and it was flawed in the beginning. There were challenges that Nova Scotians were not accessing it. I don't believe there's only 2 Nova Scotians that wanted to go to post-secondary education who are presently on income assistance. But that program needed to be reviewed. It's the same as we have to do with the Harvest Connects program. That is not actually working the way that I believe it should. The in-home support program that we, under the direction of the member from Richmond, we were thrilled to be part of pushing that forward to make sure it's available for Nova Scotians. But that's not working the way it should be, and it needs to be reviewed. So we as a caucus will watch as this program begins to be laid out, whether or not Nova Scotian children are getting an opportunity to have access to it, whether it is doing what the department is intending it to do, and we'll do everything we can, quite frankly, and I can commit our caucus to this. We will do everything we can that is in the best interest of the children of Nova Scotia, particularly those children at risk and those children who need us to stand up and make sure that the services are available for them. We're prepared to be a working partner in this legislature to make sure that Nova Scotia children are put first ahead of politics. So I want to commend the minister for bringing this forward. We'll be watching it very closely, and we'll probably give you some advice on how you can improve it. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture on an introduction.
Yes, and thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to introduce 2 very distinguished gentlemen that are in your gallery, the Speaker's gallery. One is the former Minister of Agriculture and of course, a former MLA for Colchester North, a friend of the farmer and a gentleman that can be seen at community events throughout the summer and fall all across Nova Scotia, still standing up and fighting hard for the farmers and their families in Nova Scotia. And that is former Agriculture Minister Ed Lorraine. I know Ed really appreciates the round of applause from his colleagues in the House here. And as well, I would like to introduce, if I could, a gentleman that has for a long time now represented the forestry concerns and forestry interests in the province of Nova Scotia, a constituent of the beautiful Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, the Executive Director of Nova Scotia Forest Products Association, Mr. Steve Talbot. I wonder if Steve would stand and receive a round of applause. And Mr. Speaker, if I could conclude, I'd like to make an introduction in the East Gallery. I know the NDP is anxious here, but I would like to introduce a Halifax Regional Municipality Councillor and a former MLA in the House, Mr. David Hensby. Mr. David Hensby.
Government's notices of motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas signed contracts announced today with Internet service providers brings all Nova Scotians one step closer to becoming the most connected area in North America by the end of 2009. And whereas this commitment is a major cornerstone of providing all Nova Scotians with access to this vital electronic infrastructure, and whereas the completion of the $74.5 million Broadband for Rural Nova Scotia initiative will mean that more than 200,000 Nova Scotians, 93,400 dwellings, 213 schools, and 5,600 businesses are connected. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate all partners in this ambitious provincial project, including the federal government and our newest high-speed internet service providers, Bragg Communications, Inc., and Seaside Communications, for making this vital link accessible across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, just before I read my resolution, if I could make an introduction. In the Speaker's Gallery, we have a number of guests with us here today representing several of the latest signatories to the Come to Life Charter, assisting all as they promote our province when doing business. They are, and I would ask them to stand and be recognized,
Representing Admira, a former member of this chamber, Jim Smith, VP, Corporate Affairs and Human Resources, and Stephen Sham, Chair of the Board. Welcome. Of Farnell Packaging, Don Farnell and David Stanfield. We have with Anniganish RDA, Alicia Grant. The Brain Repair Center, Joanne Tussia. Gail Pierre Jerome with the People Bank. Catherine McDonald and David Goff of Aerospace and Defense Industries Association of Nova Scotia. Mike Perry, Modern Media. Justin Fox of Kean Canada. Ray Ritzy, Heritage Gas. Protocase, Mike Redderham. Brennan Gillis, Nova Scotia CBDCs, an old neighbor of mine. Dan Hodgson, CEO of Burns & Grand Credit Union. Steve Talbot, Executive Director of the Forest Products Association of Nova Scotia, and John Leahy of Immediate C Interactive. And I would ask our guests again to receive the warm welcome of the House. Now I got to find the resolution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in May and October, 66 additional private sector organizations joined the province to promote Nova Scotia and its attributes wherever they do business by signing our Nova Scotia Come to Life Charter. Whereas Nova Scotia Come to Life is now represented by 89 organizations from cutting-edge universities, a forward-thinking community college system, industry leaders, and innovative Nova Scotia businesses and associations. Whereas President and CEO of Medmira, Hermes Chan, explained why they chose Nova Scotia by saying, and I quote, "The answer is simple. Our scientific and academic community and collaboration potential is extensive. Our healthcare expertise and compatibilities are second to none, and our government is extremely active and very supportive of its industry," end quote. Therefore, be it resolved that all members welcome and thank our newest charter members for acting as ambassadors to the world. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, December 2nd, Alexander Dooley McIntosh, a former Nova Scotia Supreme Court Justice, passed away at the age of 90 years. And whereas Mr. McIntosh earned his law degree at Dalhousie University, was admitted to the bar in 1947, and practiced law for 26 years before being named to the Supreme Court in 1973. And whereas after leaving the legal profession in 1991, Mr. McIntosh also served as Conflict of Interest Commissioner for the province of Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the tremendous contribution Mr. McIntosh made to our justice system in Nova Scotia and express our deepest condolences to his family. And Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia has a certified organic agriculture industry that has grown by 25% at the farm level, while the processing capacity has maintained its current levels. And whereas the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture supports this province's organic industry through its financial contribution to the Atlantic Canada Organic Regional Network and by its representation at the new Organic Federation of Canada. And whereas earlier this week the federal government announced over $1.2 million in financial contributions that will be used to identify research needs for the organic sector and to develop a national organization that will support this growing sector. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House welcome this significant financial contribution to the organic sector and recognize the importance of this growing industry to Nova Scotia's agriculture sector. And Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Habitat for Humanity has built more than 200,000 homes around the world, providing safe, decent, and affordable shelter. And whereas our government is committed to providing all Nova Scotia families with more than a house, but providing them a home to call their own. And whereas this government is providing Habitat, the foundation for affordable housing, through the donation of property lots in the Halifax Regional Municipality and contributing a $50,000 check for Habitat for Humanity's newest South Shore chapter. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Habitat for Humanity for wonderful worldwide work over the past 31 years and the homegrown effort they continue to do here in Nova Scotia in cooperation with the federal government and the government of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for Volunteerism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas December 5th is International Volunteer Day and was established by the United Nations General Assembly in 1985, and whereas volunteers throughout Nova Scotia make an important contribution to the many not-for-profit organizations that would find it impossible to carry out their work without their support, and whereas 377,000 Nova Scotians volunteer their time with a not-for-profit community-based organization, giving just over 47 million volunteer hours a year, making Nova Scotia a leader in the number of the average hours contributed. Therefore, be it resolved that this province recognize and thank the many volunteers who have helped improve our communities, become a mentor to our children, and have made Nova Scotia the best province to live, work, and play. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Western Nova Scotia chapter of the Canadian Society of Safety Engineering was recognized for their excellence in promoting the advancement of health, safety and the environment within Nova Scotia by being awarded the National Outstanding Service Award at the Canadian Safety Society of Engineering 2007 Canadian Safety Awards. And whereas the Western Nova Scotia chapter of the Canadian Society of Safety Engineering implemented substantial safety training and awareness programs for workers in the Western Nova Scotia area, including Nova Scotia Occupational Health and Safety Act and due diligence workshops, the Environmental Health and Safety Expo, and the Valley Safety Symposium. And whereas their efforts are going a long way in creating an accident and injury-free Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join the people of Nova Scotia in congratulating all members of the Western Nova Scotia chapter of the Canadian Society for Engineering for promoting and creating awareness of the importance of health and safety in the workplace. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia, the Honourable May-Ann E. Francis, announced in her inaugural speech last year her commitment to advancing two areas of interest, recognizing healthy communities and the wisdom of elders. And whereas an award, the Lieutenant Governor's Intergenerational Award, was created by the Department of Seniors to foster interaction and bonding between Nova Scotians of different ages by celebrating and promoting inspiring intergenerational programs existing in communities across the province. And whereas the Youth Secretariat sponsors the Outstanding Volunteer Service Award, Younger Generation. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Kendra Morgan of Lunenburg on receiving the Outstanding Volunteer Service Award, Younger Generation, for her dedication to working with seniors at Harbourview Haven Long-Term Care Facility. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the International Baccalaureate Program encourages excellence for those students seeking an academic challenge And whereas the International Baccalaureate North American Inspiration Award recognizes leadership and commitment within the program, and whereas John Messenger, a distinguished educator in Nova Scotia, received this prestigious award, therefore it be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate John Messenger on receiving the International Baccalaureate North American Inspiration Award and recognize his tremendous commitment and leadership in the IB program. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Acting Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 10th of 2007, Mr. Steve Snyder, General Manager and CEO of the Halifax-Dartmouth Bridge Commission, was elected second Vice President of the International Bridge, Tunnel and Turnpike Association at its annual meeting in Vienna, Austria. And whereas the International Bridge, Tunnel and Turnpike Association, with headquarters in Washington, D.C., is a worldwide alliance of 280 members in 25 countries on 6 continents that share knowledge and ideas to promote and enhance toll finance transportation services. And whereas this appointment is a tribute to the high regard with which leaders of Nova Scotia Crown corporations and agencies are held by the international community, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Mr. Snyder on this important appointment and wish him continued success. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas every 2 years the Nova Scotia Chiefs of Police Association elects a new president, and whereas this past October, Spring Hill Police Chief Gary Copeland, who spent many years working professionally and diligently on behalf of the citizens of Spring Hill, was elected president of the Nova Scotia Chiefs of Police Association, and whereas Chief Copeland is the first Chief of Police in Spring Hill's history to be elected to the office of President of the Association, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Chief Copeland on his new position and to thank him for his many years of dedicated service to the people of Spring Hill. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for Emergency Management.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas our dedicated 911 call takers continue to demonstrate their commitment to public safety through community outreach, and whereas a team of call takers recently participated in Truro's annual holiday parade featuring Nova Scotia's 911 emergency program, and whereas they volunteered their time to distribute 911 literature and education items to local residents, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House commend our 911 call takers for their role in delivering 911 education to the citizens of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year in Nova Scotia, more than 10,000 students participate in science fairs in their schools, and more than 1,000 of them move on to participate at the regional level. And whereas in 2007, Canada-wide science fair was held in Truro, where 450 young students and volunteers were hosted from across Canada. And whereas the 36 students from Nova Scotia who participated in that science fair earned numerous medals, awards, and scholarships, therefore be it resolved, all members of this House congratulate those students who took their scientific pursuits to the national level and offer thanks to teachers and school boards across the province for encouraging their love of science. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act respecting community-based energy development in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act Respecting Community-Based Energy Development in Nova Scotia.
Bill 71, entitled An Act Respecting Community-Based Energy Development in Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Holiday Closing of Retail Businesses.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act Respecting the Holiday Closing of Retail Businesses.
Bill 72, entitled An Act Respecting the Holiday Closing of Retail Businesses.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act.
Bill 73, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 140 of the revised statutes of 1989, the Elections Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Amend Chapter 140 of the revised statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
Bill 74, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 140 of the revised statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 371 of the revised statutes 1989, the Public Highways Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Amend Chapter 371 of the revised statutes 1989, the Public Highways Act.
Bill 75, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 371 of the revised statutes 1989, the Public Highways Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Bill 76, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide Access to Defibrillators.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Provide Access to Defibrillators.
Bill 77, entitled An Act to Provide Access to Defibrillators.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the revised statutes 1989, the Assessment Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, an act to amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act.
Bill 78, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia is the birthplace of hockey, and whereas a group of hockey fans and community supporters is working hard toward the construction of the International Hockey Heritage Centre, or Hockeyland for short, in Windsor. And whereas the group envisions Hockeyland as becoming an international signature attraction that would celebrate the cultural history of hockey in Canada and beyond. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the proponents of Hockeyland for their vision and dedication to celebrating the great sport of hockey and providing economic spin-offs for the Windsor area for generations to come. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2008, the Cape Breton Cancer Centre will celebrate its 10th anniversary and will be expanding their facility in the near future. And whereas the total cost of the expansion will be $8 million, with $6 million coming from the federal government and the hospital being left to raise money for the rest. And whereas in an act of generosity, the Sydney Airport Authority has donated $25,000 towards this worthwhile cause. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the generosity of the Sydney Airport Authority in contributing towards the expansion of the Cape Breton Cancer Centre. I would ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Just a reminder to the members, if they could keep the chatter down so we can actually hear the people that are speaking, that would be very helpful. The Honourable, the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will be seeking waiver notice. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas two genuine treasures of CBC television memorabilia, Jerome, the purple polka dot giraffe, and Rusty, the harp-playing rooster, have been removed from the CBC Museum in Toronto, and whereas Rusty and Jerome played integral roles in the hit children's television show, The Friendly Giant, from September 1958 to March 1985. I see most everybody and their children have taken the show in. And whereas the family of the late Robert Holm, who played the role of the Friendly Giant for 27 years on the CBC, were disappointed that permission was granted by the corporation for Rusty and Jerome to be used in a videotaped skit at the Gemini Awards on October 28th. Therefore, be it resolved that MLAs in the legislature encourage the CBC to exercise more caution in the future toward the use of such national television icons, especially Rusty and Jerome, and encourage the public-funded broadcaster to exercise their negotiating skills and have Rusty and Jerome return to their rightful home, the CBC Museum in Toronto. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice. I'm getting lots of help and passage without debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Everybody in favour of the motion signify by looking up. Everybody in favour of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I do my resolution, could I do an introduction, please?
Please do.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw attention of members to your gallery and a gentleman who is accompanying the former Minister Ed Lorraine to the House and is no stranger to this House. He's been here when the Minister was here, Mr. Ralph Taylor, and I'd like the members to give him a warm welcome. Thank you. No, it wasn't Steve McNeil. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteer fire departments are often the first service groups organized in communities, and whereas the need for a fire department is always of paramount importance, and whereas on October 27, 2007, the Enfield Volunteer Fire Department celebrated its 50th anniversary. Therefore, be resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate the members of the Enfield Fire Department on their half-century of continuous service to their community. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mosaic Social Dining Lounge has been selected by Ware Magazine as one of the top 10 best new restaurants in Canada and has also been named Halifax's best new restaurant. And whereas the award recognizes the concept surrounding Mosaic as one of uniqueness, bringing new ideas to the restaurant industry. Whereas with the use of local ingredients, an extensive wine list, stylish decor, and a menu offering selections outside the norm, Mosaic was an easy choice for best new restaurant in Halifax. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the achievements that Mosaic Social Dining Lounge has made in the restaurant business and wish them many more years of success in Halifax. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Victoria County's Department of Recreation and Tourism received the 2007 Tourism Atlantic Technology Award at the 30th anniversary of the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia's annual conference earlier last week. And whereas Victoria County was chosen to receive the award because of work on broadband, enhancing tourism with broadband, and being a leader across Canada in broadband, with 83% of all dwellings in Victoria County presently having access to high-speed internet. And whereas Victoria County Warden Wayne Budge and Director of Recreation and Tourism Tom Wilson accepted the award on the municipality's behalf, with Wilson leading the way, and by year's end, it is expected with the completion of Phase 3, Victoria County will be the most connected rural area with broadband anywhere in North America. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Tom Wilson, a current member on Canada's E-Tourism Council, the Municipality of Victoria and its Department of Tourism and Recreation, and the many groups and individuals involved with the superlative broadband initiative. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 16-year-old Michael Hardy of Ingrimport, Nova Scotia, has had a passion for downhill skiing since the early age of 2, and whereas Michael has recently been selected for the prestigious Devonian Properties Rising Star Camp and Panorama BC, British Columbia, December 2nd to December 6, 2007. And whereas Michael was chosen by Alpine Canada Alpine as the #1 seeded athlete in the Atlantic Canada Division, earning one of 18 spots available for men at the Devonian Properties Rising Star Camp. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Michael Hardy of Ingrimport, Nova Scotia, on the excellent and merited opportunity to train with Canada's best young talent at the Devonian Properties Rising Star Camp in British Columbia, and encourage and wish Michael many future successes. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Digby, Nova Scotia is not only the most romantic town in Canada, it is also known for its world-famous Digby scallops. And whereas Richard Trelevin and his business partner Alan Franklin are bringing Digby scallops to a whole new audience by packaging them in a new line of frozen gourmet dinners, a fine example of adding value to an already delicious product. Whereas Digby Scallop Host dinners were officially launched at Pete Fruitiques on December the 1st, bringing Digby scallops to the people of Halifax in a new, convenient, much tastier form. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Richard Trelevin, Alan Franklin on establishing this line of frozen gourmet dinners, and try one of their great dinners tonight, a treat you will soon not forget. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas recently the students of North Nova Education Centre honoured the new tradition of wearing pink in a stand against bullying, and whereas grade 12 student Jane Peters followed the story from Kings County and organized the Pink Day event at her Pictou County School, and whereas the Central Kings students who started it all, David Shepard and Travis Price, were also invited to address the student body about the importance of rising up against bullying. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send their congratulations to Jane Peters and all of the faculty and students of North Nova Education Centre for their efforts in organizing a very successful Pink Day in support of the new Nova Scotia tradition that takes a stand against bullying in our Nova Scotia schools. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas lifelong Beaverbank Kinsack resident Laurie Campbell is a dedicated community volunteer, and whereas Laurie Campbell founded the Beaverbank Kinsack Lions Club in 2005 and has invested much of his time and energy to encourage donations to support various community projects, and whereas in October 2007, 69-year-old Laurie Campbell undertook a 25-kilometer walk to raise funds for the Beaverbank Kinsack Lions Club, generating over $800. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize and express thanks to Laurie Campbell on his unflagging community spirit and volunteer efforts on behalf of the Lions Club and the Beaverbank Kinsack community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the village of Kingston was incorporated June 1st, 1957, with George Balcom serving as the first village chair and Sharon Balcom continuing the family tradition by serving as chair for part of the 50th year, and whereas the residents of Kingston celebrated their 50th anniversary with a variety of events, including a Princess Tea concert in the park and a tree planting ceremony, and whereas to mark this significant milestone for the community, Canada Post has created a cancellation stamp with the village crest for the local post office. Therefore, be it resolved, members of the House recognize the hard work that went into the planning of this celebration and wish the village of Kingston and the residents continued success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Hants West.
Try this again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Hansport resident Philip Scott served as a member of the Hansport Fire Department for more than 30 years, including 8 years as chief, and whereas Philip worked diligently on an array of projects in the fire service, including the success of Maritime Fire Chiefs Convention when it was hosted in the Annapolis Valley on at least 3 separate occasions, and whereas Philip Scott, after many years of dedication and commitment to firefighting and fire safety with the Hansport Fire Department, has decided to join the veteran ranks of the department. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly take this opportunity to extend our warmest and best wishes to retired Chief and firefighter Philip Scott as he becomes a veteran within the ranks of the department, while realizing that when truly needed in an emergency crisis, he will likely be only a phone call or a page away from assisting. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this evening, December 5th, 2007, the family and friends of Paula Gallant will meet in Glace Bay and Timberley to celebrate the launching of Paula's website entitled Come Meet Paula at www.paulagallant.ca. And whereas family, friends, colleagues, and students of Paula Gallant will never forget this wonderful mother and teacher. Whereas magnetic P's that symbolize Paula, peace, perseverance, and prosecution will be made available this evening. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the family and friends of Paula Gallant on their continuing efforts to remember this outstanding woman. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year on December 5th we celebrate International Volunteer Day, and whereas volunteers have a great impact on the community, providing support to local events, and by keeping the community safe through programs such as Neighbourhood Watch. And whereas volunteers are also present in time of crisis, there to lend a helping hand wherever they can to whomever they can. Therefore, it be resolved that members of this House of Assembly recognize the importance of volunteers and encourage people in their community to volunteer whenever possible. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Highland Village Museum in Iona was recently recognized by the Council of Nova Scotia Archives for outstanding achievements in the archival field and presented with the prestigious Dr. Phyllis R. Blakely Award, an award established in 1988 as a memorial to Dr. Blakely, Nova Scotia's first woman provincial archivist. And whereas the Highland Village in May received the prestigious award for its virtual museum exhibition on Cape Breton Gaelic culture, an exhibit using archival materials to explore various aspects of Cape Breton Gaelic life. And whereas the museum's interactive exhibit is part of the Virtual Museum of Canada, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the dynamic work of volunteers and supporters of the Highland Village Museum for being honoured with such a prestigious award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Pictou County Sports Heritage Hall of Fame was founded in 1989 by two visionary citizens, Billy D. and the late Dave Melanson, and has been operated solely by volunteers since that time. And whereas the Pictou County Sports Heritage Hall of Fame is one of a few sports halls of fame in North America that strives to collect and archive memorabilia and information from all sports. And whereas the Pictou County Sports Heritage Hall of Fame has honored more than 400 individuals, including 24 teams, as athletes or builders or media, and has collected over 4,000 pieces of memorabilia, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend Billy D. for his continuing enthusiasm and dedication, and congratulate the many volunteers who have and continue to make the Pictou County Sports Heritage Hall of Fame an institution in Pictou County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Winnie Hart, a 43-year-old woman from Glace Bay,
graduated from the Adult Education Centre, which is sponsored by the Cape Breton-Victoria Regional School Board. And whereas Winnie began the program in September of 2005, but in November of the same year, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and had an operation the same month, returning to school after missing only 4 weeks
Order,
of classes.
please. We're having trouble hearing the speaker. The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And whereas Winnie thought it was necessary to prove to her own daughter and granddaughter the importance of an education, and during the graduation ceremony, Winnie was presented with a special award on behalf of students and staff, acknowledging her perseverance and leadership. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Winnie Hart on obtaining her high school equivalency diploma, as well as being a wonderful role model for women of all ages. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the town of Stellarton and Jim Nelson of Jim Nelson Automotive have teamed up to offer women a 4-week seminar free of charge on the basics of vehicle maintenance in response to what Mr. Nelson states, it's the increasing trend of women taking an interest in cars and car repair. And whereas the program has received an enthusiastic endorsement from the 3 women enrolled in the Automotive Service and Repair Program at the Nova Scotia Community College Pictou campus. And whereas Paulette Anderson, J.C. Verge, and Amby Van Veen agree with Nelson that he maintains that women make great mechanics due to their patience and attention to detail, remembering this tremendous work done by millions of women across the continent during the Second World War. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send their congratulations and appreciation to the town of Stellarton, Jim Nelson, NSCC, Pictou campus, Paulette Anderson, J.C. Verge, and Amy Van Veen for their combined efforts towards opening up new learning opportunities for women. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas ardent hockey enthusiast Billy Cleveland lost his life in a horrific car crash on July 28, and whereas Billy played an integral role in the game of hockey in Windsor West Hants, whether it was in the minor system attending Windsor Rural hockey games with his grandfather or eagerly awaiting the initial season of the Avon River Rats Junior C hockey team, he wanted to play for this coming hockey season. And whereas the River Rats Hockey Club have now dedicated their 2007-2008 hockey season in Billy Cleveland's memory, and as a result, recently had their newly fashioned team logo displaying an animated river rat in full hockey gear, modified with the letters BC and the number 6 to honor Billy. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly remember Billy Cleveland for his tremendous zest and enthusiasm he brought to the sport of hockey, and to the River Rats for their recognition of what a tremendous attribute they are missing this hockey season as a result of Billy's tragic mishap. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on August 30th, 2007, the Barbara Cole Memorial Scholarship Fund was officially launched in memory of Barbara Cole, a registered nurse of almost 50 years who spent 25 of those years as a public health nurse in the community of Preston. Whereas the sole aim of the scholarship is to provide current and would-be staff of the East Preston Daycare Centre with training and continued professional development. And whereas the first recipient of this scholarship is Sandra Cawley, a dedicated and hard-working employee of the East Preston Daycare since April 1995. Therefore, be resolved, the members of this House of Assembly recognize the accomplishments of the late Barbara Cole and her commitment to the people of Preston, and congratulate Sandra Cawley on receiving this distinct honour. And I'd ask for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Guys Pro has once again hosted a Doctors Nova Scotia Provincial Triathlon championship competition. And whereas Geisler has proven to be a first-class triathlon host with 90 athletes participating, and whereas triathlon director Kerry McNulty was very happy with how the successful event turned out and was very grateful to the 18 volunteers. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Geisler and the volunteers for this triathlon event. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Immigration. The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas schools depend on community volunteers for support, and whereas Newcomville Elementary School has been the benefactor of many services provided by community volunteers, and whereas Greg Pelkey made a significant contribution toward the Newcomville Elementary School School Bazaar fundraiser. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House extend thanks and congratulations to Mr. Greg Pelkey for his donation of a homemade guitar which was constructed by him and valued at over $1,600. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sheffield Mills Community Association has honoured its war veterans by erecting a unique memorial on which the veterans' names have been engraved on 2 millstones, indicative of the community's history of being an original site of many mills following the time of the Acadians. And whereas President of the Sheffield Mills Community Association and Kings County Council member Jim Taylor, along with Bill Swetnam, Eric Jackson, Matthew Harvey, Oren Sterrett, Eugene Martin, and Brian Lloyd were instrumental in the planning, design, and construction of the memorial with help from community members and families of the veterans. And whereas the members of the Sheffield Mills Community Association plan to continue by adding a commemorative plaque, flagpole, and host an event to dedicate the memorial during Heritage Day celebrations. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the outstanding efforts of these people and their valuable contribution as citizens, not only to their community, but to Nova Scotia as well. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall ask for the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Terry Fox Run is an annual event to raise money for cancer research, and whereas the hard work of community volunteers in organizing the event ensures the success of the Terry Fox Run year after year, and whereas the run has shown continual growth, raising over $21,000 this year in Bedford. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the invaluable efforts made by the 2007 Bedford Terry Fox Run committee members for another successful event. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Idol show chose Dwight Dion as one of their 22 finalists out of 10,000 competitors in a 10-city cross-country search. And whereas Dwight Dion is an East Coast rocker who was originally from West Pubnico, a fishing village in Yarmouth County, making it all the way to the top 4 of the Canadian Idol show. And whereas Dwight Dion became a household name this summer in my community and all across Canada, it made us so very proud of his accomplishments. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Dwight Dion for his achievements on the Canadian Idol show and wish him continued success with his music career. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Williams Farm of Great Village, Colchester North is a family operation run by Carl Williams and his wife and their daughter and her partner. And whereas the Williams Farm is well known for the superior quality of its Angus breeding stock, And whereas the Angus stock used on the Williams farm carries genetics from across the country and produces calves well known for their growth potential, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Williams farm for being named Maritime Angus Commercial Breeder of the Year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. It is now 3:25 and we will go till 4:55. The Honourable, the official leader of the opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to return from the Chamber of Commerce dinner, and I thought for sure I'd return to find that everybody in the opposition had horns. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. My question is for the Premier, Mr. Speaker. It is the law of this province that, notwithstanding the provisions of any other act, every officer, clerk, or employee of an agency of government shall provide the Auditor General with such information and explanation as the Auditor General requires, and the Auditor General shall have free access to, at all times, to the files, records, books of account, and other documents in whatever form relating to the accounts of any agency of the government. So my question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is this: will the Premier ensure that his government gives the Auditor General all information about the immigration nominee program?
Hear, hear. The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, any relevant documents that should be and can be will be forwarded to the Auditor General as they should be.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition, on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that the Premier has the right to decide what documents are relevant and what documents are not. You know, Mr. Speaker, in 1989, the Auditor General saw all information about the new liquor warehouse and revealed that the government had chosen the most expensive bid. In 1999, the Auditor General saw all the documents about the P3 school construction and told Nova Scotians that no formal analysis had been done before government committed $250 million. With immigration to our province declining so far this year, Nova Scotians deserve the full truth about the nominee program. So my question for the Premier is this: how will the Premier ensure that his government is completely open with this audit?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the government will follow the rules and regulations in place and ensure that appropriate documents are forwarded. Mr. Speaker, I would want to correct one thing in my honourable colleague's question. He suggested immigration is down this year. Mr. Speaker, the year has not ended, and the numbers, I'm sure that member and all members will be very pleased to see the growth in numbers this year, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition, on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, past behaviour is the best indicator of the future, and I know you'll find this hard to believe, Mr. Speaker, but in 2006, this government withheld information from the audit of its revenue estimates, and they made the auditors copy other material by hand instead of allowing for photocopies. The Auditor General, an independent public servant, accountable to this House, requires the full access to information required by law. But MLAs are told no such access has been offered. So my question to the Premier is this: why is the Premier's government creating obstacles for the Auditor General, whose job it is to ensure due regard to economy and efficiency, in this case with the nominee program? Just what is the government hiding?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to follow the appropriate procedures and protocols in place as we have always done, Mr. Government. It is this government and the previous government since 1999, Mr. Speaker, that has been more open and accountable than any previous government in our province, Mr. Speaker. Generally accepted accounting principles, Mr. Speaker, putting in the Ministerial Code of Conduct, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that, Mr. Speaker, we provide the information that's relevant to the people of the province so that they can be part of the process, such as the process, Mr. Speaker, we put forward today in making sure that 100% of Nova Scotians have access to high-speed internet in our province.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, over 2 months ago, my office requested documents related to the Atlantic Accord proposal presented to the federal government by our Premier, and any correspondence related to those proposals. What we received were 3 letters. They were signed by our Premier and sent to the Prime Minister and Minister Flaherty on April 3rd, May 29th, and June 6th of this year. The problem is the letters were completely blanked out. So my question to the Premier, what was stated in those letters?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker,
Order, please.
Speaker, sign that agreement and make sure this province was protected for the full beneficiary of the offshore, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier did not bring home the Atlantic Accord. What he brought home, according to Bill Casey, were 20 pages of amendments of the Atlantic Accord. Nova Scotians want assurance that our Premier went to Ottawa and fought for nothing less than the Atlantic Accord that was signed in February 15th, 2005. And according to his own finance minister, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia will have less money this year, next year, and the year after. That's his finance minister. So my question to the Premier is, if you fought so hard for the Atlantic Accord, why won't you release these letters in full and let Nova Scotians decide for themselves?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Speaker, the last time we negotiated the offshore accord, the Liberals, provincially and federally, wanted us to take less money, Mr. Speaker. Well, we won't take less money, Mr. Speaker. We negotiated an agreement where we're getting more money, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, add to that, Mr. Speaker, the Crown share, which the previous federal Liberal government would not give the people of this province. The people of our province deserve the Crown share. And finally, we have a federal government that recognizes that.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. You had 3 letters between you and the Prime Minister. There were 3 letters between you and the Prime Minister. You've blanked them out. You will not release them so that Nova Scotians can decide for themselves. Your own finance minister has said you settled for less. Tell Nova Scotians why you settled for less.
The Honourable, the Premier.
I hope that my honourable colleague will join me, Mr. Speaker, in calling on our federal MPs, Liberal, Conservative, NDP, all of them, Mr. Speaker, and our independent, Mr. Speaker, calling on them to vote to make sure that Nova Scotians don't lose $1.5 billion. That's what the Liberals want to do in this province. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker. Shame on that party, Mr. Speaker. The once great Liberal party of this province is no more, Mr. Speaker. It is gone, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will stand up. Speaker, we will stand up for Nova Scotians. That crew wanted to take $640 million to last time. Mr. Speaker, they were willing to settle for less. We're not willing to settle for less. We're taking more, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Agriculture. The perfect storm hitting our agricultural sector in Nova Scotia continues to worsen, and this government's action has done nothing to help. Today, Joe Van Vulpen, one of the largest hog producers in Cumberland County, fears his industry will soon be a memory because the province is refusing to provide additional funding to struggling farmers. This industry, through Pork Nova Scotia, has been requesting a transition plan, but all this government has provided are reactive plans instead of a proactive long-term vision. So my question for the minister is this: when will he become a serious partner in the transition process for this important industry?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would inform the opposition leader, the official opposition leader, that the Department of Agriculture and this government, through the leadership of the Premier, have been working with the pork industry for well over a year and a half now. This is a national crisis, quite frankly. It's not just a Nova Scotia problem, but this government, on a per capita and per producer basis, has put more money in to the hog industry than any other province, Mr. Speaker, and we're working extremely hard with the individuals that are still producing pork. There has been a number of programs, the direct payment program. We are encouraging farmers to use that for transition. We are working on a case-by-case basis with the farmer and their family. We are helping them sustain. But yes, the industry is smaller, but Nova Scotia will have a pork industry in the future, and that industry will be profitable, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Predictably, the minister will stand and speak of past announcements, but the reality is that Mr. Van Vulpen captures the issue when he says that there has been very little help for the hog industry since 1998. There's been nothing other than occasional grants to farmers and loans that only put farmers further in debt. This government has shown no leadership in transitioning our pork producers or our agricultural sector. So my question to the minister is this: what is stopping you, or who is stopping you, from bringing forward a transition plan for our farmers?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the pork producers that have taken the initiative, have worked with the Department of Agriculture. Many of them have moved to different models. The farmers, the pork producers recognize, and I think even the NDP's agriculture critic is starting to recognize, that you can't stay in that old North American market model, Mr. Speaker, where the cost of production is more than you actually get for the pig. Mr. Speaker, and that's how it's working today. And what this government has put in place is a number of programs that are working with the farmer to transition them from these models of unprofitability to something that will sustain. But again, I want to emphasize to all members in the House, Mr. Speaker, this is a national program, but this government has done more than any province in Atlantic Canada to work with our producers. In fact, Mr. Speaker, just back a couple of months ago, we put in place a pork transition fund in this fiscal year of $500,000, Mr. Speaker. And since the year 2000, and with all respect to the Leader of the Opposition and his comment, Mr. Speaker, I'm wrapping up, that we haven't done anything since 1998, we've put in over $16.5 million since 2000. Thank you.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the minister should talk to some of the pork producers. They say that without a transition plan and bridge funding for pork producers, in 6 months there will only be a dozen hog producers left in the province, and they'll all, Mr. Speaker, be shipping to the United States. The pork industry was worth more than $30 million at the farm gate and more than $100 million to the province's economy. It supported 1,500 direct and indirect jobs. So my question for the minister is this: what does this minister plan to do to ensure that pork producers and other farmers have a future in this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture. Short answer.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell the Leader of the Official Opposition one thing this government is not going to do is act irresponsible and expect the taxpayers of Nova Scotia to continue subsidizing non-profitable farm operations. What we are going to do is work with the farmers in the province of Nova Scotia, and we're going to do it on a case-by-case basis. And Mr. Speaker, $16.5 million since 2000, more than any Atlantic province has done. More, Mr. Speaker, and we will keep working to do more for our farmers.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, Statistics Canada published immigration figures yesterday showing that between 2000 and 2006, immigration in all of the other Atlantic provinces and the Prairie provinces increased at rates far higher than Nova Scotia's. Saskatchewan increased by 58%, Newfoundland by 68%, New Brunswick by 101%, and Manitoba by 118%, and PEI by 171%. Nova Scotia lagged at 55%. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Premier is, why does the Premier continue to insist that our immigration program is a resounding success when Nova Scotia continues to lag so far behind the other Atlantic and Prairie provinces when it comes to attracting immigrants?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there was two things I took out of those numbers. Number one, Mr. Speaker, we have to do a better job as a province to attract more and more new immigrants to our province, and we all recognize that, and we intend to do that. And the programs and the policies we have put in place are attracting more immigrants to our province, Mr. Speaker. The second thing I noticed in those numbers was very positive news, and that was between 2001 and 2006, Mr. Speaker, and I believe the number was roughly 15%. Of our immigrant population here in Nova Scotia came during that time period, which is a significant increase as compared to the 10 previous years. So it's proof, Mr. Speaker, that the policies being put in place by this government are working.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Citadel on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I think we should tell those 60 or 70% of those nominees who left the province and those immigrants who leave the province that the policy is in fact working. Mr. Speaker, according to Statistics Canada, net international migration to Nova Scotia was down 23%. You know, the Premier conveniently stopped at 2006 over the first 6 months of 2007. Again, migration into Manitoba, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and PEI went up by leaps and bounds. New Brunswick went up by 50% and PEI by 63%. And those same statistics, Mr. Speaker, show that 20,000 Nova Scotians left the province in 2005 for other parts of Canada, and only 15,000 moved to Nova Scotia, a net loss of 5,000 people in just 1 year. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Premier, how does he propose to deal with these significant outmigration losses suffered by Nova Scotia's economy and society?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member is obviously confused about the numbers, so I will refer that to the Minister of Immigration to straighten it out.
The Honourable the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure where the honourable member is getting all his information. I can tell you right now that in Canada, Mr. Speaker, last year from 2005 to 2006, overall immigration within this country decreased 4%. But, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you with all confidence that in this province of Nova Scotia, under this government, immigration increased 34% over that number. Mr. Speaker, I can also tell you that Nova Scotia has doubled the number of foreign-born individuals living in this province, double the number more than New Brunswick. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Citadel on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's great to know, I'm reassured that the Minister of Immigration is not following the immigration statistics that have been released by Statistics Canada itself. But we do know that the Minister has already admitted that immigration was just not a priority before, and it does not appear to be a priority now. Mr. Speaker, back in 1979, Nova Scotia's youth population peaked at almost 169,000. Since then, our population of 15 to 24-year-olds has dropped to less than 125,000 people. That's a drop of 25% in one generation. I'd like to ask the Premier, Mr. Speaker, since the Minister of Immigration is not looking at those statistics, what long-term strategy does his government have in place to deal with this demographic time bomb?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there are a number of initiatives that the government is taking, Mr. Speaker, with respect to growing the population here in our province. Immigration is obviously key to that, and we need to see the numbers grow considerably. I would like to see that number, Mr. Speaker, get up to the 10,000 mark, which is what we see in Manitoba, and I see no reason why we can't reach that target. We also have to take a look at the retention rate, going from the 40% at current getting it to the 70% which we have set as a target. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, we have to grow the economy in this province. And we have to not only keep our graduates here, Mr. Speaker, we have to attract new ones back. Now, if we listen to the opposition, the NDP, Mr. Speaker, who want to stop, Mr. Speaker, development in downtown Halifax, Mr. Speaker, who obviously have something against various private partnerships we have, we wouldn't grow the economy in this province, Mr. Speaker. This government will forge ahead and make sure that we do grow the economy in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. When the Premier brought home his new Harper-McDonald Accord, he boasted to Nova Scotians about the success in getting the Prime Minister to come to the table on the issue of Crown Share, an issue that has been trumpeted by Conservative Premiers for over 20 years. However, the Committee to Determine the Crown Share Payments will make non-binding recommendations to the Prime Minister, who will then decide if he wants to make the payment or not. So my question to the Premier is, why would you agree to a deal that still leaves in the hands of a man to decide whether he wants to meet this commitment or not, who doesn't believe in signed agreements?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the facts speak for themselves. There will be federal regulations put in place within 90 days, Mr. Speaker, of when the report comes back. And, Mr. Speaker, we had a provincial Liberal government here between 1993 and 1999. We had a federal Liberal government, and they did nothing, Mr. Speaker. They did nothing when it came to the Crown Share. My honourable colleague mentions Crown Share, mentions Conservative governments. He's right. It took 2 Conservative governments to make it happen, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this money has been spent several times over by former Conservative governments, and Nova Scotians are still making payments. The debt of this province is over $12 billion. There's only one place for this money to go if the Prime Minister decides to act on the recommendations, and that is directly on the debt. So my question to the Premier is simple. Will you apply that payment, if it arrives, directly to the debt of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
Debt is an obvious priority for this government because, Mr. Speaker, through our planned approach, for the first year, Mr. Speaker, the debt has finally stopped growing in our province and is going down, Mr. Speaker. It's going down. Mr. Speaker, added to that, Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague should be calling on the federal Liberal leader, Mr. Speaker, calling on him not to sit in his chair, but to stand up for Canadians and stand up for Nova Scotians and support us on the Atlantic Accord, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if he thinks about what comes out of his mouth before he says it. No. Did I actually hear him say, I apologize, Mr. Speaker, did I actually hear him say that he wants the House to call on federal members of Parliament and colleagues to fight for the Atlantic Accord? Do you remember a guy by the name of Bill Casey, who did exactly what that Premier asked him to do? And the only member of that cabinet who had the courage to stand beside him is the Honourable Minister of Transportation. Do not give us a lesson on the hypocrisy of your government. Mr. Speaker, my question is pretty simple. Do the right thing and put the money directly on the debt.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it's very simple. All the member has to do is pick up the phone and call his Liberal colleagues, the MPs here in Nova Scotia, and say, listen, support what's going through the House of Parliament at the present time so that Nova Scotians will not lose $1.5 billion. They are willing to give up. The provincial Liberal Party and the leader here is willing to give up $1.5 billion and the Crown Share. Shame, 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 Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. This government continues to defy logic by not implementing well-researched strategies to improve health care, Mr. Speaker. We know that 80% of Nova Scotians would rather die at home, yet 70% of Nova Scotians end their lives in the hospital, Mr. Speaker. It's not the best strategy for Nova Scotians, nor the best use of resources in our healthcare system. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, when will his government recognize that palliative care is an essential part of health care in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government fully realizes the issue of palliative care and how people deserve to die at home if their wishes to do that. Mr. Speaker, we have over the last number of months been able to to work on that strategy, put people in place. We are continuing to employ or looking for the employ of an individual to work on that strategy, to implement that strategy on behalf of all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first
District
supplement.
health authorities have been calling on a provincial palliative care strategy for years, Mr. Speaker, along with many groups, especially the Palliative Care Association here in Nova Scotia. In the latest business plan for the Annapolis Valley District Health Authority, it states, and I quote, "Patients are dying while waiting to see the palliative care physician and most likely in pain and suffering," end quote, Mr. Speaker. And I'll table that business plan. My question to the Minister of Health: why is this government dragging its feet when it comes to a provincial palliative care strategy for our province?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, quite honestly, the system itself was not capable of taking on a full provincial palliative care program. We had to start with those areas that did not have a palliative care program to begin with. I know that the Minister of Energy, member for the MLA for Yarmouth, and myself worked very hard to get a palliative care program for Yarmouth and the Southwest District. And I know that through the last number of years, we've implemented and added dollars to different areas of this province to make sure that we have a comparable level of care across the province. Is it enough? No, Mr. Speaker. But we are continuing with those recommendations and making sure that they're going to be implemented and make sure those dollars are available so people can die at home.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
And the Minister, Mr. Speaker, refers directly to the problem. It's sporadic throughout this province. It's not fair. Each district health authority needs to ensure that they can service those individuals who need a palliative care program, Mr. Speaker. Dying shouldn't be about economics, but it should be about leaving this world with dignity, Mr. Speaker, and the dignity of all Nova Scotians. We need to address that. Yet we know that a palliative care program is less expensive than dying in a hospital, Mr. Speaker. So I ask the Minister of Health, when will the Minister implement a province-wide strategy to help people when they need it the most, Mr. Speaker, in their final days?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I know through the continuing care strategy and through what we've been able to implement there, that we're going to continue to increase the palliative care entitlements, making sure that people are available to have nursing care in their final number of months of life, making sure that they have the oxygen services that they need. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to expand that program as time will be. I said a home care entitlement, Mr. Speaker. I wish the member for... I'll sit down. Thank you.
Good idea. The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Post-tropical storm Noel left thousands of Nova Scotians without power, some for several days. I was approached by social assistance clients who had lost most of their perishable food due to the power failure. Department staff told me that they wouldn't offer help because the perishable food should be good for 72 hours. So my question to the Minister of Community Services: what is your government's official policy and practice in terms of replacing perishable food for income assistance recipients after extended power failures?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to my colleague across the way, I thank her for the opportunity to rise and speak to this issue, Mr. Speaker. We know, Mr. Speaker, that in times of storm, in times of emergency, there are always challenges, Mr. Speaker. We all face them as individuals and certainly as departments of government. We have funds, Mr. Speaker, available for special needs as supervisors and caseworkers see fit, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that those fine working staff at the Department of Community Services will ensure that the policies are kept up and that individuals are cared for the best they can be, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley on her first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know what I was told by department officials, and this may be a policy, it may be a practice. Mr. Speaker, I'll table a pamphlet produced by the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture titled, "Is My Food Safe? Knowing What to Keep?" I quote, "Discard any foods where the temperature has been over 4 degrees Celsius for longer than 2 hours," end quote. It is unthinkable that anyone should be expected to eat perishable food when it is up to 70 hours past the point where it's safe to eat. My question to the Minister: why are staff not following the food safety guidelines of her own government in determining whether food needs to be replaced?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the health and safety of all Nova Scotians is a collective responsibility, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will ensure that we continue to do the best that we can, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that individuals who require that special needs assistance get it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, on her final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, either the policies need to be clarified or they need to be better communicated to staff. The same brochure also says that if the fridge is kept closed, food might stay cold for 4 to 6 hours. Now, it appears that this government has learned nothing from Hurricane Juan, when we saw many people go hungry because help replacing food was initially denied. My question to the Minister: why is her staff quoting 72 hours, and will she ensure the policy on food replacement follows safe food practices?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the safety and security of all Nova Scotians is the utmost concern, Mr. Speaker. I would be happy to personally check out the brochure that the member is referencing with the Minister of Agriculture. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't question that my staff are doing a phenomenal job across this province, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that their clients are being well cared for, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, last year the Premier took away statutory holidays from workers in Nova Scotia. He left this important matter in the hands of the businesses and corporations to decide whether or not to open on Christmas Day or Canada Day. The people of Nova Scotia have clearly stated that the Conservative government has made a mistake with respect to statutory holidays and want this changed. So my question to the Premier is, will he admit that he completely mishandled this situation?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I refer that to the Minister of Environment and Labour.
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to stand and to remind Nova Scotians once again about the bill that we brought in that gives workers who traditionally were exempted from working in those industries the opportunity to opt out as long as they give 7 days notice to the employer. Enough workers aren't taking advantage of this, and so it's an opportunity for me through the legislature to remind people of this wonderful bill that we brought in and that all Nova Scotians should know about.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, I've received phone calls, letters and emails from Nova Scotians who are not happy with this Premier's decision to throw caution to the wind on statutory holidays. This Conservative government has flipped its position on the issue from one extreme to the other, and the Premier must deal with this matter once and for all. So my question to the Premier: can he commit to changing his most recent position on statutory holidays, which is a mistake for Nova Scotians?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I refer that to the Minister of Environment and Labour.
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I can't. The honourable leader has accused this side of being hypocritical. This is an instance of hypocrisy on his part. Whose party was it that led the charge against Sunday shopping? It was the Liberal Party here, and here he's being entirely hypocritical. He's changed his position, he's flipped and he's flopped like a fish in a frying pan.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that fairy tale must belong in the new Nova Scotia the Premier is talking about. It was this party that fought for Sunday shopping, but we did what was respected the workers when it came to statutory holidays, and we said we would protect them. I'm not sure why the Premier and his government have decided to pick a fight with workers in all sectors in the province of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotians deserve their statutory holidays, Mr. Speaker, and they deserve a government that will listen to them when they speak. Clearly, this government is turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to Nova Scotians. So my question to the Premier is, don't you feel that workers should be allowed to spend Christmas Day with their families?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I refer that to the Minister of Environment and Labour.
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member mustn't have heard my first answer because they have that right. We enshrined it in Labour legislation. All they have to do is take advantage of it. So I would suggest that he tell members who are speaking to him that they have that right. Please use it.
The Honourable the Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Glaze Bay for joining in the applause. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. My question is for the Minister of Justice. Last June, the Auditor